Well, good afternoon and welcome to The Way Forward. We are very privileged today to have Lieutenant General retired Jason Evans with us. Jason and I served a few times on active duty. We actually were at Fort Knox, Kentucky for a while, and he was there doing great things to help the Army in the personnel arena. And so welcome, Jason. It's good to have you today.
Thanks, Chris, and it's good to see you. And yeah, the couple times we got to serve, it was really about us generating people capability for the Army, and particularly when we were at Fort Knox. And so great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, I lose a little sleep every night thinking about, what the Army will look like. And I guess now it's like 25 years instead of 30.
Yeah,
You
for
and I
sure.
influenced the way we did. So we'll either
Yeah.
go in history as good guys or we really screwed it up. So
Look, what I can say is we were making mission when you and I were in.
oh. Okay, some people in our audience will understand what that means.
You and I do, though.
That's right. We were making mission, but hey, who's counting? Who's counting? Anyway.
That's right.
I'm sure the environment is terribly different after 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So, hey, tell us about yourself, about your military career, some of the highlights, and what are the things that make you a unique individual in the world of consulting? And now that you're in the civilian sector, how can you help leaders?
Sure. So I'd like to start, from the grassroots. My father was a 30-year veteran, and so I served. And so the importance of that is I emulated my father, and so much of what I learned in terms of basic leadership and team building was through him because he was an enlisted man, and so I turned out to the military. And so my journey started in '84, a human resources officer, and ended 40 years later, 38 years active and 2 years reserve component. And so in that time span, most of my time was spent in human resource management. And why that's important is I think our first principle of leadership is people. And people are the most important resource. I know that's cliche-ish, but I have found over time that is very important. Because even in our service, and regardless of how the technology develops and the weapon systems and all of that, it's still a person. It is still people that is driving the success of an organization. And so I spent 30 years doing that, had the opportunity to command the Army's Human Resources Command. So I understand on a large scale how the talent acquisition, talent management, succession management, performance management, and all of that, how that works to support a large, complex Army or organization that is constantly changing. And so you have to have adaptability. You have to be able to surround yourself with good people. And so at some point, the Army thought it would be wise for me to be a mayor of sorts. And so when I reached colonel, I had the distinction of commanding Fort Monroe, which is really, you're a city administrator, you're a mayor. And so I learned how to be a city administrator or mayor of a small city, which led me to go back to MCOM at the operational strategic level and manage or have oversight of the Army's active duty installations. And then eventually becoming the Army's first G9 when they transitioned the AXM, the Assistant Chief of Staff for installation management, to the G9, which no one could figure out what that meant. And what that really was, it was a different version of the AXM because of the hierarchy, organizational structure, and command and structure, because you now had the commander of Army Material Command involved. You still had the Assistant Chiefs of Staff of Army for Installation Environment involved, and you had the ASA for Manpower Reserve Affairs involved, because we had family programs and soldier programs at the same time, had infrastructure, housing, military construction, utilities, and then eventually climate control. So the G9 covered the full spectrum of what would go on in an installation, what would have to go on in a city, and so consequently had budget management of about $18 billion and oversight.
Jason, say that again. 18, how much?
$18 billion budget management.
Okay, I want to make sure the audience catches the B, not the M.
So you can manage our program management budgeting cycle was very complex and arduous. And so it took months to find out where all those dollars were down to installation level. So, but had that for the 141. So most people don't realize that the G9 really had oversight of not just the active component, but it was the total Army when it came to infrastructure, military construction. Had the opportunity to testify a few times before Congress and doing that. But along the way, met some great people. What I will tell you that if a leader tells you that their success was due to their own intelligence, due to their own good looks, that's not true. No one in my mind makes it in this world, and particularly in organizations and particularly in leadership, unless you have people around you, and you have to embrace that. And so I realized that my success is largely based on people. And my perspective on mentorship is that most people look at mentorship as a senior subordinate relationship. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, if someone is offering you some advice and you take it and you act on it, you've been mentored.
Yeah.
And I've had E3s for the audience, private first class. I've had some wonderful Department of Army civilians. I've had a diversity of people provide me mentorship. And that was because I was willing to listen to them. And so I think any good leader that has some self-awareness and can be introspective, you can be successful. As long as you can surround yourself with people and understand people and engage with them in a meaningful way.
Well, we're just going to end there because that's the whole. You hit everything on the head, and I thought it was funny when you talked about intelligence and good looks, and so I probably would have died out at captain. So, God, that wasn't a criteria for promotion in the Army.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's also interesting to me. You're not the first to include myself, who is a military brat raised by a non-commissioned officer, to teach us those incredible values and skills as children, and then to carry them on with us into the service. So again, being about people. Let me unpack a few of these things. So I like the thought about the mayor piece of this, because I was an operational and garrison commander in Honduras, where I had sort of and I got a feel for what you were talking about, not to the degree that you did, but it was an international thing. And then, as you know, we were at Fort Knox. I was the senior commander, and I had a colonel doing it for me. But it's interesting because I bump into municipalities out here in the civilian sector, and talking to mayors, and looking at the struggles, and the difficulties that they have. It's interesting to me, in most cases, I find it's a part-time job,
Right.
and it's almost like an honorarium, and the degree of difficulty associated with it and the responsibility that's levied on some of these people. It's such a reversal from
Yes.
you and I grew up. Do you have any experience with it in the private sector?
Uh, so I'll tell you the experience I had within the military and then in the private sector. So first of all, when I was the mayor, if you will, garrison commander, I would tell you my success was really based on relationships. You are not going to be successful unless you have relationships with the outside community. Because when you had emergencies with power lines going down, water outages, that was a shared emergency with your neighbor. So I had a great relationship with the mayor, and so I was successful because we shared capabilities with one another. We had agreements. But now that you transition to the civilian, I really didn't have a huge issue transitioning from what I was doing in the military to now, because I had spent the last 4 years in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And what I had to impress upon in my interviews out here was that the people that I'm coming to work with or dealing with here are some of the very same people, because in the Pentagon, you have a complete diversity of people. And what the first thing they think is, oh, okay, you've been barking orders or giving commands to people in uniform. No. In the Pentagon, what I explained to them based on the Constitution, there's really no one in uniform making decisions there. You're working for the civilian authority by Constitution, and relationships with the assistant secretaries and the political appointees is crucial in order for us to be successful as an organization. And so you have people from different political parties. Of course, you and I were always apolitical. And so we were effective at dealing with whatever party came in as they changed. And I've been in the Pentagon when the new party would come in based on the president and the next. And so it was important to build relationships with the people who were coming in, understand their background, they understand your background, but get on common ground about what is it we have to do for our nation. And you and I know about being public service, so we were always selfless service, right? As a
Yeah.
public. So that transition for me to the civilian world, what I tell people now that I'm out here in the civilian world, you're really not showing me anything about people that I haven't already seen because I've been around the diversity of people. I give you a prime example. When I was the director of military personnel management during the Obama administration, I was basically responsible for the personnel policy, the integration of women into combat, religious accommodation, and transgender. And so I understood that, right? And you got to deal with the stakeholders from the different, different interests. And so I've talked to a lot of different people and interacted with a lot of different people. So my transition to civilian world wasn't bad. The thing that was different that I learned in the Pentagon, and I would always mentor military folks, leaders who were there for the first time, that you can't come here and treat civilians like you treat soldiers. We have a thing called the Uniform Code of Military Justice in the military, where you can give a verbal order, and that's lawful.
Yeah.
But you're not going to give a civilian a lawful order and expect the UCMJ to cover down on that. So it's a very different approach. You have to counsel, you have to have performance objectives, and for civilians, you have to have individual development plans. And so it's a very different process how you address a soldier sometimes more directly than you would a civilian. And so it's just communication skills, right? It's people skills, and you learn everybody's an individual. And so you want to adapt to the individual, adapt to the culture of the organization, and try to inspire people to the vision, to the mission, right?
Oh yeah. When I was on Capitol Hill, as the liaison, again,
Right.
immersed in a very different culture, they had a term up there, it's all about relationships.
Yes.
The entire, institution of Congress only functions because of relationships. And that can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. And so the negotiation skills, I think you and I learned in those capacities, even at the installation level, you and I had
Yeah.
more civilians than we had green suiters running around and working with those different groups and families. And so good on you. Hey, let's talk about your personnel side, because another thing that I've bumped into here, I bumped into the municipalities and trying to help mayors and city councils and things to get better organized. We can talk about all day long about rivalries between little small towns and not understanding the concept of working together. They can bring more to their citizens, but there's still a little bit of the competitiveness out here that I think is it's developed over time for the wrong reasons, I think, and hopefully we can knock those barriers down. But what I find with the smaller companies or even mid-sized companies, the lack of an HR department or capability and what it does, everything from conflict resolution to workforce development, and then the ability to help the leader have somebody who's always thinking about the people to walk in once in a while and go, hey boss, you're so focused on the product, you're so focused on the bottom line, you're losing the team.
Yeah.
And again, it's all about the people. If you get that right, these other things will be okay. And it's really interesting, how we are perceived in the military because of Hollywood, that
Right.
we're this draconian, you must do it kind of thing. And really, you and I are birds of a feather. It's all about the people.
Yes.
Are you seeing that? How do you talk to people about that?
So that's a great point. And even here out I'm in higher education. So I will tell you that any company, and regardless of size and complexity, if you don't have your CHAR or your HR person sitting in those C-suite meetings, I think you're underestimating the full potential of your organization. because the HR person has the pulse of the people. If they are invested in the people, because I will tell you that the people are the most important resource, and HR is the lifeblood. And ultimately, what you want in an organization is say, I'm taking care of my people, right? Good or bad. But people have to be focused. You have to have workforce development, first of all, because people need to understand there's a path to success.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some kind of learning management going on there to reskill and upskill as technology changes, as your mission changes to adapt to an environment. How are you upskilling or reskilling your employees? Do you have a learning management plant program? You have to have someone in there that can do the conflict resolution, as well as the when you get legal issues, right? And how do you do conflict resolution? How do you reassign an employee? How do you deconflict when employees, and how do you take care of employees and make sure that they're getting the FMLA, family emergency leave, when they need it, right? And that you have an actual compensation program that employees believe that they can get compensated for their worth, right? And a lot of that has to do with the classification, how you lay it out, how you have the different classification of job jars, job descriptions. It's clear. Everyone, I've been to organizations and shown up, and people don't even have they don't have a job description.
Yeah, job description. Yeah.
So I arrive in the civilian world, and I'm going, hey, what's your job? So we took the time, and you know what? The employee was really appreciative that someone took the time to say, you're going to codify what my job description is, and you're going to codify it in a way that they can see it in the vision and mission, and then you align specific performance objectives and metrics that they can achieve. That's pride on their part, right?
Yeah.
They're not wandering aimlessly anymore. And then you can report that back to the C-suite. Hey, we have this many employees, this is going on. And you can empower the different C-suite guys, because they're going to be busy. And they're going to be looking for you for advice on what should I do with this employee? How, because every answer is not fire somebody. Why is that employee not performing?
Yeah.
Right. Well, you just gave him a new duty assignment, or you just gave him a new position. He or she has not been trained. So now, how are you going to upskill, reskill? That's what the HR guy does that assessment, and make sure that stuff is laid out. You have to have talent management. You have to have succession management. When you have succession management, in my opinion, people are invested in the company because they see a pathway to success, right? If not, then you're gonna be dealing with this thing we call turnover, because people will not sit idle in a position when they know they have the capability and potential and talent to do something else. What are they gonna do? They're gonna go somewhere else, right? That's the purpose of workforce development. Workforce development, you can do a mentoring program. We implemented that at HRC. We implemented a mentoring program where people could go talk to people who they wanted to be like in their field of work. And so I would tell you, if you don't have a strong HR department, I'm not sure that you have a organization that can reach its full potential.
How, I have the experience of having that almost identical conversation with a CEO or a board, and have them say, I'm not interested in doing any of that. If they don't perform, they know what they're supposed to be doing. And if they're not meeting our requirements, we'll just fire them, get a new one. How do you respond to that?
You can. So here's what I'll tell you. And you and I know there's a famous saying, that's a course of action. That is a course of action. But here's what I'll tell you. You may discard that person, and that person may go to another company and be able to reach their full potential. You've just given your competition the talent, right? Yeah. I think that it's worth the time to invest in someone to understand why they're not being successful. Have you given them the right tools? Have you given them the right objectives, performance objectives? Again, how do you have an employee that doesn't have a codified job description?
Right. Well, it's interesting because that is foreign. That's a foreign concept.
Right.
The moment I came out and started working with everything from Fortune 5 to startups, it's perplexing to them to go, okay, I don't have time for that. Well, the first response normally, because you don't have an HR department.
That's it.
Anybody thinking about this, and so it's yours, and so it's it's peeling away from your up and out ability as the CEO, because now you got to think down and in. And then you got to get lost in the noise of trying to figure out how to organize this and codify this. And people will say, well, I don't want to codify things because it locks me in and it takes too much time and I don't know exactly how we do it anyway. So what we end up doing is we do the operational design first. We draw out, what are you actually doing right now? And then you pull that back to the organizational design and go, you hired somebody to be, a bean counter, and you've got them, tuning satellites. Did you
Right.
know that you hired them to do this, but this is what you have them doing? And then they have these 9 additional things that you just lump on them, and you can't figure out why they're not performing. Okay. It's because your business has moved so fast that you've created probably an organizational design that is no longer valuable. And so you have to go back and relook at your organizational design and see, is it created for that? And that's where you sit and look at the lack of job descriptions or the mismatch of job descriptions and skill sets. And then again, that's what your HR department does for you. They're constantly updating, and they're going, okay, you just gave this person 9 more things to do and you didn't prioritize any of it. Where are these 9 new things in their priority? So the HR person can go in there, so you don't have an employee that's put in a bad position to go in and go, I'm not going to do all this, because then now you got nobody to do
Well,
conflict
so to
resolution.
your point, so I look, we both know we've been in the military, and I can tell you right now, I get it. The bottom line out here and why it drives is money. Ours is blood and treasure.
Mhm.
But I don't think anybody in organizations morph, change, task organize, retask organize at speed, particularly in combat, than the military.
Yeah.
So I'm not buying that we have to move so fast because this product life or the service is expiring, that we can't take time to build a culture of excellence with our people, because you're giving one. I've seen it. You're giving one. You'll take your best person, because the person who's average and you don't want to invest in that best person, you'll give them that 10 tasks and you'll burn them out.
Yep. Yeah.
You'll work them to the point where they're not productive, and then they can go look out across the horizon at other companies and go, hey, I can get twice the money
Yeah.
and not do what I'm doing here. So I will tell you, that's why you want HR, because you want the guys who are driving the train on, it's about the dollar, it's about the product, it's a financial forecast. You don't want them messing with the people.
Yeah.
Get the HR person who can do that, nurture the people for you, make sure you have the right, this cliche, the right person at the right time in the right job.
Yep.
That's what HR people know. They know what talent looks like. That's why talent management is important. That's why succession management is important. That's why workforce development is important, because if you have employees that have potential, Chris, all they need is someone to care about them and say, hey, we're going to get you some more training, or we're going to show you how to do this right, or we're going to codify this in a way where you really understand what you're doing. Because here's the other thing where they say, I don't want to codify. Well, if you don't codify it, then you have people aimlessly doing things that are not productive.
Yeah. Yeah. They do the things that
Right?
are comfortable with and not the things that are important.
Right. What you've done is left it up to them to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I think, the analogy I used recently with a guy, um, of course, I won't say who it was, but I said, look, your HR person is like the guy with the oil can running around your machine.
Right.
And he's given just the right amount of oil to make everybody as effective as they can be. And also to identify to you where you got a part that's starting to wear. And
Right.
that part needs some attention. And what I found is a lot of time it's the overworked part, obviously, that the heat is on, that pressure, and everything relies on that one part to do its job, or the whole total thing breaks down. And when you've got somebody of talent who's doing that, they're not going to say no. They're just going to keep taking, they're going to working. But what happens is they start working themselves into a level of incompetence, and it tears at their fabric of professionalism. They know
Yes.
they're better, and they go home, instead of having 6 wins, they've got 9 losses, and so that wears on them over time because they're just not accustomed to that. And so your HR person goes, that part's about to break. We need to take some of the load and shift it, or we need to go, are these really the most important things that this person should be doing? It's the prioritization piece. So you codify, This is what you're supposed to be doing. And then the next thing we teach is, okay, let's look at prioritization. Because like you said, you and I have found, and I'll use our analogy, the little old lady in tennis shoes that has been requesting a report from your headquarters or your organization for 200 years. And the report's validity is nothing other than her job security to keep asking for the report, and it burns your people out. And I
Yep.
don't know how many times I've went looking for those because I with my HR department they can go, here's 3 points of light I need you to go take a peek at. So you
Right.
help me focus my valuable time to go find those inefficiencies to make command decisions or boss decisions, if you would. I'm sure
No, I
some experience
agree.
with that.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think, a first principle of transformational leadership is you have to be able to inspire, and
Mhm.
you're inspiring a passion within people. I will tell you, if you take a different approach, regardless of what the business, and I'm in higher education, what you have to do is be able to get people to see themselves in your vision and mission and
Yeah.
see how their contribution can either be detrimental to it or the success of it. And all people want to do is want you to be transparent with them, right? If you embrace them and say, hey, here's what you do impacts how successful we can be, and here's some metrics that we need, some performance objectives, then people will do that. You can teach people, you can inspire people, but people talk about transformational leadership all the time, but it is built on culture. It is built on a group of people that are passionate and have been inspired by the leader and the organization to achieve the vision and mission.
Well, let me ask you this. So now that you're in higher education, because I started out there when I first got out, how does that how does that resonate where you're at now, if you don't mind me asking? If you don't want to talk about it, we can take a 3 second.
No, it's I will tell you, I would just say this to, and if you're looking across the spectrum of higher education right now, there are a lot of military leaders leading higher education in the HBCUs as well as the Division Ones. I'm just talking about all services.
Good.
It's more than a handful of us out there leading, and there's a reason why, because the skills that we have are transferable to creating a vision, creating a mission, setting the conditions, and getting people behind all of that, right? Because if you're a good leader, you can get people behind the vision and mission, right? We don't have to be the smartest person in the room. We know how to get all the smartest people in the room to come up with the best courses of action to address the issue, problem, or mission, right? And that's what we do. Um, I will tell you, it is transferable because even in higher education, you have a lot of bright people when you're talking about faculty. But again, at the end of the day, Chris, they're people.
Yep.
And it's how you're going to choose to interact with them and understand. I read the book Range by Michael Watkins before I came here, because it sets, first chapter is about you got to change your mindset and leave your old habits behind. And so I knew that I couldn't come and rely on this military hierarchy, and understand that I'm coming to deal with a different group of people, and I'm coming to deal with people that I still have in my family, Gen Z, millennials, right? I have the alphabet of generations for my grandkids and my kids. And so, and it was no different for me, because I looked at it like this. I've been a public servant on a national level, and I'm a public servant for the state of Tennessee. And I tell people, now I'm a public servant and I understand what that sacrifice means, that I'm working for the student. When I was in the Army, I was working for the soldier. And there's not much different in the age of the student and the soldier.
Oh yeah.
And the soldier, I tell people, they don't come from a different planet. Guess where they come from? They came from your community. They come from America. Most people think a soldier is something, or a military person, something so different. No, they're different after they matriculate through this very disciplined, educational, leader saturated process that we have, but they're the same people. They
Yeah.
have the same interest as these young kids that are here. And so I interact well with the kids. I've made, when you read Range, you have to understand you got to get a relationship, and you have to match the strategy with the environment that you have here, right? And so there's been some discovery learning about how we do things here. Um, I do like the fact that, in the summer it's 4 days a week. Friday we're off. That's why I'm talking to you. Yeah. So, right. And so, it's a continuous learning thing. But I found many of the principles of how you set your strategy, how you do strategic assessment, how, you get people behind the idea, making sure they understand their job, the performance objectives, and link it back. We in the Army, we do recruiting. I've been involved with recruiting like you have. I have enrollment management here. What is that? That's recruiting.
Yeah.
Very, very similar, as you have to go look at what markets, right? And you have to have recruiters out there, and you have to have standards. And we have, test score standards and GPA, but it really is how I have chose to interact with people. And my interaction when I came here was to learn and
Mhm.
to listen, because I knew I was in a different environment. But I will tell you, leadership prevails regardless of what the mission is, as long as the leader who comes in is willing to come in and embrace, learn, and understand. Then you can employ the same leadership skills, as long, because there's no mission that's really that's hard to learn. You just got to get the people behind it and create the culture that supports it.
So within that culture, there's a lot of us that we get excited about education because I mean, yeah, I don't think the civilian sector understands how much we teach. How many times you and I have been on hundreds, if not thousands, of platforms with speeches and teaching sessions and training sessions and constantly in mentorship mode, which is, a big part of what we do because obviously our passion's about getting the people right. But a lot of people that I mentor coming out of the Army, they're always worried about higher education because, most of us have not had the time to get a terminal degree. We have tons of master's degrees, but the myth is that you have to have a terminal degree, you have no credibility. Are you seeing that? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I disagree with that, because I think that I give much respect and humility to someone who has a PhD. But I think at the end of the day, if we both have a common goal we have to achieve, we have to figure out how we're going to communicate to achieve that. And I found out that I've been able to interact with the professor here and faculty very well. One thing they like about us is we have the innate ability to get things done.
Mhm.
Right. And I call it this thing, the MDMP, the military decision making process. And that has been golden about how you address an issue or problem. And the thing they like about us is that we can quickly dissect problem, right? Come up with courses of action. Get our job is to get the yes, identify the risk. And so I brought that technique here, and I try to mentor the staff that I work with. Hey, let's slow it down. Let's slow it down. What is the purpose? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Right. And then you lay out some COAs and you get everybody involved in developing that. They're owning it now, right? They like the fact that they're owning it. And you have some people with different expertise that can come in and help you with the risk. And at the end of the day, you have some COAs, and then you've addressed the issue. And they really like the fact that we really can get things done because we have this training to galvanize people around the issue, challenge, or opportunity in a very organized way, and resolve the issue. Whereas sometimes here, it can come into a debate,
Yeah.
uh, and a debate about ideas, instead of, hey, what are we really trying to, what is really the purpose and problem? What are we really trying to do? We're very good at that as military people, because we have to know what's the objective,
Yep.
what problem. So we're very good at singling out what that is, and then get the right people around that to achieve. And so I've been able to bring that here, and they embrace it, because at the end of the day, what they want is what we want in the military, is mission accomplishment,
Yeah.
right? And faculty are concerned about students, and if there's a student issue, they want it resolved. They don't want to have to be the one. So if it's a missions scholarship issue, whatever, they want to be able to go to somewhere where they can get that resolved quickly, so the student can focus on learning and they can focus on teaching. But again, I will tell you, in any organization, in new organizations, is your ability to establish leaderships and learn. Don't come in thinking you know it all. Come in thinking you have to figure out how to know it all.
That's great. That's great to hear because I know some place it's hit and miss.
Yeah.
I it sounds like you've clearly, hit your niche, which is great to hear because I know there's some that are frustrated with it. I know it's intimidating to a degree. You got a general officer, especially a 3-star like you comes walking in, and you're a very persona. You're the vulnerable servant leader type. And then to try to slowly take that humbleness, which is very, very important in the process. Because I think what's the civilian community, it was interesting. When I was doing it, I was working for the vice president of student affairs. Every
Mhm.
day I learned something new. I mean, and I was all about how does this work? And oh my goodness, student affairs works all summer while everybody else gets to take that 4-day
Right.
thing,
That's right.
or actually even more than that. But
Yeah.
student affairs, now they've got football camp and cheerleading camp and baseball camp, and they've got speech and band and all that stuff. And they have a whole, younger group of people
Yes.
during the summertime. So it's managing difficulties and watching them do all that stuff. And at one point, I know the VP, we're probably about 8 or 9 months into it, and he finally looked at me and he goes, I feel bad because you're always giving. He goes, but I suddenly realized that I'm giving as well. And I said, how do you mean? He goes, I'm teaching you how to be a civilian again. And man, that really stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't just, an academic world that's true. That's true for all of our transitioning soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, and guardians. When they come into your workforce, you got to remember that you're literally training them to do something they haven't been for a
Yeah.
long time. And
Hmm.
if that bonding happens within that organization for that individual, man, we'll give you so much because, as you said, we'll get there early, we'll work hard, we'll figure out the why, we'll determine the purpose,
Hmm.
and we'll get
Hmm.
things done. And we don't just give you one way to solve a problem. We normally give you multiple options, and then we'll
Yeah.
rank order them and say,
Yep.
degree of difficulty, degree of risk, because
Right.
it's just the way that we're able to, as you said earlier, to move on the fly and adjust and be agile, adaptive, and innovative. And the more we feel that is valuable to the person that we're working for, like the employee we were talking about earlier, first, you will give us a lot to do, but that's okay. We'll keep doing it.
Right.
But we're in the process, you're doing something for your country as well, which is to help a veteran to reassimilate back into the environment.
Right.
Especially for somebody like you to be, I remember when you got out a few years ago, you
Right.
didn't this relaxed, look this young. I can tell you that. It looks like you've gotten younger now that you've got this under your
Thank
belt.
you. Appreciate it.
No, you are the good looking intellectual guy that you
But it's
talk.
it's a mindset. Look, when my year transitioning, I heard horror stories of general officers having a difficulty transfer. And here was my thing. Even when I was in the Army and I had military aides and assistants, I didn't have them for personal servitude.
Yeah,
I had them because I wanted that young person to have the opportunity to be exposed to things that their peers would not, in some cases in their entire career, would not get exposed to in terms of how the Army works and sitting in a room and learning from senior leaders. So when I got out, I didn't have a problem doing things for myself because I was doing them. I wouldn't let an aide go get a lunch or pay nothing for me and or any of that. That person was there to help coordinate the mission and me to help expose their learning. I mean, that's part of the mentorship, exposing people to something that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to enable their learning. But down here in the it's personality management. You
yeah,
you have personalities. You just have to decide: are you going to react, or are you going to figure out how you and that person are going to have a relationship, right? Because you can react. I left the 3 stars. I'm very proud, and people call me Jason. Doesn't bother me. They say, "What do you want me to call you?" I said, "Well, you call me Jason. If you call me General, okay." But I didn't come in here this environment and say, "You will call me General," because if you have a PhD or terminal degree, they want to be called Doctor, and
yeah,
I'll call them Doctor. But if
yeah,
you call me Jason, I'm okay with it. But that was my way of disarming people about the perception that I'm a general and I'm coming in and I'm barking orders. No, I'm not doing that. I'm coming in to collaboratively try to solve problems, try to seize opportunities for the betterment of the future And I always call these kids, you're our future leaders. And that's the drumbeat I brought from the Army, because that's what we do with our young recruits. They're our future. And we're trying to develop them to be like you and I. So
Yes.
I'm down here trying to get these students to understand, hey, I'm here for you because you are our future. And trying to get them to embrace that, right? But it's not all roses. You know, you do have to deal with some personalities, but you and I have in some cases been negotiators for our country when we're on foreign land and we're representing our country. And I tell them, hey, look, I've had to negotiate status of forces agreements for import export and mail for Iraq. And so, you know, and you're dealing with some customs and courtesies that you have to get over and before you get to the point of, hey, let's talk about the issue. So I'll tell you, we military have skills, negotiating skills and people skills that we really are, that are invaluable. And we should be able to go anywhere as long as we can draw back the hubris, get the humility, and have the self-awareness. You will be able to interact with anyone. But if you bring this thing that I'm a general and I, you know, that's not going to happen here. You're going to have to do some things for yourself. You're going to have to roll up your sleeves and show that you can do some work down here and earn some credibility that way, because you cannot stand and do the Michael Jackson with your hands on the hip. And that's not going to happen.
Where you from, son?
That's not going to happen.
Yeah, to me, the ultimate compliment, and you and I are really wired the same way, like this.
Right.
Is for somebody to come in 3 days later and go, hey, man, I didn't know you were a general. I'm sorry. And I go, no, that's success for me.
That's exactly right.
It's just a conversation between two people, then I've been successful. Emotional intelligence is kind of almost everything you've talked about today.
Yes.
And it's something that we actively strongly encourage at the beginning of any engagement we do with CEOs and leadership teams and offsites. We always start with emotional intelligence. And you've probably said it at least 5 times today, you know, self-awareness, social awareness, empathy, motivation, all the factors that, you know, that guys like Daniel Goleman and even Simon Sinek, you know, to a degree, talk about that. And you're out there doing it every day and being successful with it. So, and I think that goes back to, you know, we've talked about different forms of leadership. Everybody else, like, what form of leadership do you recommend? And, you know, we've talked about transformational today. We've talked about servant. We've talked about humble leadership. To a degree, we've talked about adaptive leadership. I guess what the lesson is for our audience is, I think it's Goleman who says it in, you know, Leadership and the Power of Emotional Intelligence. He said, a pro golf player, you know, is not going to use a 7-iron for 18 holes.
Right.
A pro golf player is going to have a bag full of, you know, clubs that all meet the different situations. And for us, the way you and I have been raised, you got to have all those. So there's a time to be direct and autocratic when lives are at stake. Very few times have I seen that in the business world. Maybe, you know, 2008 when companies having all those very, you know, having those threats were different kinds of threats than you are accustomed. But for the most part, you know, those 4 or 5 different kinds that you use are all situational dependent. And you're getting all those today. So I commend you, sir.
I think the importance of that is that people who go around and say, I'm a transformational leadership and I'm transformational only, I think that's a little bit flawed. I think you can be on the range. And here's where we get our reputation in the military, is that we're transactional.
Yeah.
That we can't elevate to the transformational because how we deal, we're lockstep. That's not true. I think good leader can be on the range of those. You want to have a transformational leadership because that's what's really going to uplift your company. But at some point in jobs I had in the Pentagon, I had to be transactional to get things done. So I understood that. I had to be autocratic. And here's what I explained to the civilian or the environment out here about being autocratic and command type leadership. In the military, it's imperative that we do that because that could be someone's life or death. If you're on the range and the weapon's not up and down the range, then you're going to be very autocratic because someone can be killed. And that's how I make that distinction for them. And then they go, oh, okay, I get it. Because they'll, you know, I'm in the doctoral program here for educational leadership. And the first thing they'll tell you, there's never anything, a situation for command out of it. And I say, well, hold on, wait a minute now. There is. When it comes to blood and treasure, and it comes to health, life, and safety, even out here, you have to be absolutely commanding of that situation and autocratic at that situation to make sure the health, life, and safety of that individual is protected. But it all comes down to me. Check your attitude, check your ego at the door when you're talking about emotional intelligence. And that's a hard thing to tell a C-suite guy. I mean, this guy, has 10, went to Yale or Princeton or wherever, right? And he's been very successful. And, he got the venture capitalists who they want a quick turn on stuff. But to me, if you're invested in the organization and you talk about emotional intelligence, you got to check your ego, because emotional intelligence means that you have some humility and you're willing to show empathy and compassion to other people, but you can still be demanding.
Oh yeah, I think
You can fire somebody if they're not doing what they need to do.
Well, the example I gave was the dorm is on fire and you're knocking on door to door, and you have a student who says, "Yeah, I'm just going to wait it out and see what happens." That's when I become autocratic. That's
autocratic right there.
Knife finger, which is you doing something to help you because you for some reason don't understand.
Right. We've all raised children, and we've had to tell them to do something that they didn't understand, but it was for their best interest.
Oh yeah.
But we had to tell them to do that because we knew better than them, because of our past experience. We have been through that. They haven't been through that. So they don't really understand the why. And sometimes when I was growing up, my father wasn't going to give me the why. But now that once I grew up, I knew the why.
Yeah.
It was not a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Well, there's two forms, the autocratic leadership and the pace setter. Those are two that they talk about that are needed in crisis. That if a company is on the verge of failing, the pace setter is going to come in and go and cause everybody to up their game, up and save the organization.
Yep.
It's not sustainable. It's only used in case of emergency, brake only in case of fire, and you get them up to stabilize, then you go back to normalcy.
Agree.
And it's a great movie. I'll just throw it out. We can cut it. But if you watch 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck, it's Black.
Oh yeah.
He goes in to save an organization, and he has to be the kind of leader that he hates.
Right.
He knows he has to be that autocratic pace setter to get those airmen to survive daylight bombing during World War II. And it's still taught today at two of the war colleges to go, sometimes you have to be a person you don't want to be for the betterment of those you lead. And then afterwards they go, wow. And I know times that I've had to do that, someone has lied or put somebody's life in danger, or accidental discharge or things of that nature, where I've had to be that guy I don't like to be. But years later, bump into him and say, I really didn't understand at the time, but now, thank you. I'm a better person for it.
Absolutely.
You have to hope for that. So there's a place and a time for it, but it cannot be your way. If it's your way, you're going to destroy your organization.
Sure, because the consequences of that is that you're going to impact everyone else, and you're going to impact the culture, and you're going to create a double standard, and you can't get it back.
That's right.
You cannot have lawlessness, right? You got to have rule of law. You just do.
If
you don't have some rule of law, then if the exception is the rule, then you have chaos because there are no rules.
We won't talk about who changes the rules a lot in this world. But anyway,
that's right.
Anything you want to leave us with, Jason? This has been great.
No, as always, Chris, it's been a pleasure. I love talking this topic. Again, leadership to me and leading organizations is simply about people, regardless of the organization. If you don't have that human resource element in your organization, I think your culture will suffer. I think you can be successful, but you're going to grind through some people if you're not taking care of the people. If there's no one there to take care of the people, you're just going to keep grinding them off until you get to the product life faster, because you're running out of the most important resource to do the job, which is the people.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much.
All right, brother.
I got goosebumps, man. I look forward. Hopefully somebody out there watching this will just say, I need this guy to come talk to me or talk to my organization.
Well, they need both of us to come talk to them.
It's all right. We'll wear them out for a whole day.
Right.
All right, my friend. Thank you.
All right, brother. Take care.